عنيد أنا كالصخور إن حاولوا عصرها وقاس أنا ككل النسور إن حاولوا ظهرها.
Hello everybody. مساء الخير الجميع إذا أنتم ببلاد العربية وصباح الخير عنا. Actually, it's turned over, but welcome everybody. I have no idea what happened at the beginning. We were supposed to go into the thing and then you all saw us probably, but welcome. I'm so excited for today to have my comrade Abboud join me. Before we get started, welcome to also the East is a Podcast listeners. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, Psychic Militancy, go ahead and do that. And then folks who are listening on my channel, make sure you subscribe to East is a Podcast. Share this, like the video. These are the things that I had to learn very quickly, that it actually makes a difference. And in conversations like this with somebody like Abboud, YouTube really does come down hard on us. So send to a comrade, consider becoming a Patreon. That way you'll know that these things are happening beforehand. I think that's all. I'm very excited for today's conversation. Thanks everybody in the chat already. Abboud, this has been a long time coming. I can't tell you how excited I am. أهلا وسهلا فيك. شكرا كتير على وقتك. I'm so excited that you're joining me. And just let's start off with how you're doing, Khayi.
As good as one can be, given the circumstances. But yeah, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. It's always a good starting point. Yes, as good as one can be. Well, you and I have a lot to talk about. The last time we were on screen together was with our comrade Jay on Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. And it feels like a decade has passed. There's been a lot that has happened. Today, you and I were thinking about talking about disrupting normalization in Palestine and Lebanon. And certainly there's a lot that's happened on both those ends. So let's just jump right in. Like, where's your mind at? We can start with normalization. Of course, you and I talked a little bit offline about some of the things, some of the structures or the infrastructure that sets that up. But let's jump right in, and I think we'll have a lot to get into.
Well, I mean, it's a very complicated term, this notion of normalization. For one reason, first and foremost, and I think we should also perhaps have some sort of self-critique here, Laura, is that normalization as a word kind of accepts the term set up by this kind of American hegemonic architecture in the region, which of course Israel is part of, but also the larger Arab bourgeois classes and rural classes in the Arab world that have set up this agenda specifically in the wake of the 1967 war. In meaning that, we see on the side of those who reject normalization, acceptance of the word of normalization as an organizing principle through which sometimes they or want to actually engage politically, whether it's, things like the BDS movement, specifically in its work in the Arab world. I don't mean here necessarily its work in the global north, or campaigns, cultural or political, across the world, Arab world, that actually takes up the agenda of anti-normalization. Why I say it's problematic, because in fact, in older days, let's put Egypt's Nasser, for instance, the Khartoum summit, in 1967, the 3 no's. The idea of normalization or accusing somebody of normalization was not the norm, So the norm was that it's betrayal, that it's one of these grand political, morally corrupt acts an Arab would actually make. So there's something here to speak to. That first, that on some level we have normalized speaking about normalization, even as an anti-normalization camp, if you want, in the Arab world, with its different pedigrees of politics, alliances, etc. And I think that on some level is problematic, and we can understand to some degree why it has been normalized. It has been normalized because of the expansive political structure under which we live. The idea of calling people traitors for negotiating with Israel and pinpointing that, or for engaging in peace talks, or for engaging in cultural exchange, because throughout these years, since Camp David in 1978, when Anwar Sadat, initiated this peace process with Israel, has become problematic, because it means that the concept itself will have to fold in so many people, sometimes so many segments of Arab society. And therefore, I think on some level, even those rejecting any form of engagement with Israel as a settler colonial state with its own agenda for the eradication of the Arab peoples of the region, but also specifically the Palestinians, is that we've accepted this concession, because it would, calling somebody a traitor and not doing something about it is also quite problematic. So then calling them normalizer is a bit of a space where you can actually engage perhaps in some sort of political, media, cultural debates without necessitating, for instance, criminal punishment, acts, etc. And of course, sometimes, like Lebanon, it's still a criminal offense. Now,
yeah, exactly. Not that it currently matters. So part of what you're saying is this like move away from precision, from traitor to normalizer, is a sleight of hand in some way that takes people off the hook. Like you actually have to do something. If you're a traitor, number one, you're saying there's an entire fabric. If somebody's a traitor, what is the infrastructure that has allowed them to do that? How do they become a traitor? What do you and I think it's a heavy word. Like traitor means something with fucking real consequences. You don't say somebody's a traitor in the context of our region or in engaging with an enemy state. Like that's where that comes from, right? The idea that it's an enemy state. It's not just about normalizing a presence, which is very important for us in terms of like psychic concessions, I think, is normalizing a presence. But you're taking it a step further and you're saying when you use the word precisely of traitor, it also calls into being the sort of relational dynamic of an enemy that's involved in that. And there's a whole host of behaviors and consequences that come with that. So the sleight of hand then comes, let me make this a little more expansive. Let me soften this a little bit, even though it still has currency. Like, I don't think you're saying it doesn't have currency. We understand what that means in the context of our region, especially in Lebanon right now. But I like that you're taking us in this direction, because I think that then gives us a different angle to understand what's happening right now in Lebanon, right? Like we've had, I think you and I talked about before, about there's decades of us watching the PA and the native bourgeoisie and elites do this dance. The way that it's read sometimes is like, oh, it's a puppet state. But you and I are both sort of talking about actual interests of a particular class of people. We see the Lebanese authority now come into being, but we can think about this as a long political project if we start where you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think I started there because I think it's perhaps important for us to remember that it is a word that conceits before it is also a word that also mobilizes. Specifically when we talk about anti-normalization campaign, it does have currency, of course, but it's still currency within this environment of concession. And again, as you said, and as there are now different, if you want, typologies of the traitor. Like there is the normal spy, if you want, that works directly with Israeli intelligence and informs on a specific operation on people, etc. There is, however, also these kind of structural forms of complicity that I think go in both directions, as you were trying to say. And I think this is important for people to also, grasp that these structures are not necessarily only imposed from the outside, as important as that as well, that the violence, there's an organizing violence that actually forces Arab polity to engage with Israel, with the US in a way through which, specific political configurations come to be, but there's also in various directions across the region, various projects that have seen in Israel since its inception a power that they can use for their own political agendas. And this is not something really new. I mean, we can imagine it as this new kid in the neighborhood, and you have a problem with your own neighbors, and you can perhaps sometimes use it. This happened pre-1948 on the level of Palestinian villages. If like two families, for instance, are engaged in some sort of feud that has, you know, generational element in it, as many in Palestine did, for instance. Can I recruit this new European incomer to become part and parcel of my ability to defeat this other clan or tribe, and etc. And that, you know, that moves into sectarian forms of politics that are also kind of reinforced by colonial structure, whether it's the French and British in our region specifically, and then moves into, if you want, also the rise of a native bourgeois class, you know, that has forms of dependency on its relationship with the imperial core, and therefore also is very vested in the sustainment of that relationship, and therefore also in the sustainment and normalization of Israel itself. So all of these come together in different ways, but this is why, for instance, it's a quite feat, for instance, to name things right now politically. I mean, in terms of political mobilization, how do you name a traitor? When you understand what is happening is, you know, treacherous, but you cannot still speak in that language in a way that would actually make sense, because if you're using betrayal, traitor, spy, things along those lines, again, it has consequences, and therefore normalization becomes kind of a word that everybody agrees on. So, you know, anti-normalization people and normalization people are both in agreement that it's a normalization process. You know, they don't mind naming it as such, and they don't mind using that term as a way to actually understand the historical process and choices that peoples and states have at this particular conjuncture, for instance. So, yeah, I mean, I think we should be cognizant of its political cost as well.
Yeah. I mean, it takes the edge off in some ways. I'm wondering on the daily, like, one of the things is that for me, it feels like you can read a lot, you can be in the know, and then there's living under these conditions and all the various seductions that end up happening. It seems like part of what you're saying is this slow move towards using normalization as a catch-all, where you're right, both people who are against it and people who are for it are just like, we understand what is being said, but we're understand what's being said on a structural level, like the granular details of what is involved in that feels like it's more up for grabs if you're using a catch-all like normalization versus betrayal. So we can look at, you know, the Lebanese government right now. And while it might be true that they are normalizers, I think there's something very important and packs a bigger punch when you are saying that the normalization seems to be the process or like the larger structure. But what you're actually doing in impact and effect and relationally on the level of society is betraying something very central. You are a traitor on every level, but the traitor piece for me comes because you are choosing a particular class position and sort of you know, after effects over the wellness of your people. And of course that comes down hard on certain sectors of society than others. I think this is what you were talking about sectarianism. It's just like there's a coercive relational configuration, and it's going to fall and exploit on particular fault lines, right? So the people who are being ethnically cleansed or displaced or dispossessed at a higher rate are Shia Lebanese, we know that, right? But that betrayal is not just against Shia Lebanese. I think this seems to me the dangers of going into just the normalization without the betrayal, because then it can sequester people and be like, oh, it's just the Jnub, it's just the South that's being sort of, you know, thrown under the bus, when part of what you're saying is like, no, this is a totalizing project. And people who betray a particular political project, who betray the promise of liberation and ridding ourselves of a settler colonial project that's been around for this many decades, everybody's being betrayed.
Yeah, I mean, so we can take it on different levels here. So first of all, I think what we should really, you know, place front and center in our analysis of this project, I already kind of alluded to it, is that there's a definite historical process through which betrayal becomes normalization. Normalization itself becomes a form of habituation. And slowly but assuredly, it appears as a principal question in Arab polity, one that many Arabs, even recently with the Abrahamic Accords, have chosen to go down that line without you know, any even homage to the Palestinian cause as such, you know, with the Emirati-Israeli agreement, for instance. You know, in the past, we can take, for instance, Camp David referred to some sort of Palestinian autonomy as a condition for, you know, the peace agreement. Of course, it was more symbolic gesture. The Egyptians wanted something to give them some sort of legitimacy for signing the agreement rather than actually insisting on it as a principle. Similar with Jordan, when they signed the Wadi Araba, there was some gesture towards the Palestinian state that will come through the Oslo process. Same with the Oslo process itself. There was this kind of state idea, management of temporal expectation and futurity, while new normalization projects and the new normalization we're asked to actually accept is one where Palestine and Palestinians disappear, and where Israel is regionally dominant. And in fact, they are structured more as total surrender agreements, even with you know, already established states like Lebanon. Surrender agreements meaning that, you know, there is an expectation out of the process whereby the Lebanese state becomes a security mechanism, part of the arsenal that Israel can actually extend deep within Lebanon itself and across all of Lebanon. And of course, there's a lot of danger in this for Lebanon itself, or for Lebanese life and society and culture in the coming future. Not only necessarily in this kind of you know, question of Hezbollah and resistance as such, but even more, if you want, in Lebanon's position, if you want, as a cultural and a political space in of itself. Lebanon will lose itself in this process. That's what I mean. But having said that, of course, if it goes through, I'm you know, this is not an assessment that it will go through, but just if it would go through. I think the second element of it is that historical process through which we see how Arab states are engaging and Arab bourgeois are engaging with Israel, a feeling that they can engage without, you know, with kind of an expectation, anticipation that Palestine is not as central, is not as important, either in people's perceptions or in its ability to disrupt. And of course, that was a mistake before 2023. It will be a mistake in the future. You know, there'll always be, you know, if things are resolved without actually going into the foundations of what should be resolved, you know, things will reappear and reemerge just by the sheer fact that Israel itself is also quite different, but also because the Palestinians and those who are allied with them will never stop resisting. But the other, I think, more central is that in the past 30 years, Laura, we also have had quite organized investment in the Arab media landscape and Arab cultural and knowledge production. And you know, you can easily make the claim that Al Jazeera, for instance, is one of the principal drivers of introducing Israel to Arab audiences across the Arab world. That this normalization process has a symbolic register in, for instance, bringing up Israeli talking points throughout Arab homes that Al Jazeera initiated and instigated, but also other Arab channels predominant in the region become part and parcel of this circulation of agenda, political agenda, framing of politics, events, etc. And that entire media infrastructure environment. And in Lebanon, for instance, is the MTV, Al Jadid, OTV, all these different TVs that are now heavily invested in the normalization project, LBC, etc. But also in larger, Arab arena, there is hundreds of these channels, hundreds of these media operations, well financed by Gulf countries, bringing in Israel into our homes, giving this perspective of Israel as an intimate enemy, slowly turning that intimate enemy into a non-threatening enemy, slowly turning that non-threatening enemy into somebody that could be understood, that has actual demands. So that psychic attack, if you want, through the media operation has been going on for 30 years. And one of the products of it is that it did actually and was successful in reformulating the agenda, to which also even anti-normalization, pro-resistance intellectuals have to respond to all the time. For instance, the whole discussion that came after October 7th in the Arab world on whether the resistance holds the responsibility for what occurred and unfolded. So resisting gave permission in this kind of rendition for Israel to commit genocide. This is the type of engagement that you had to push up against, whether it's in this organized social media campaigns, whether it's in the discussion that were coming to the forefront of the Arab pundit and media and commentating class across the region itself. And of course, there are smarter operations than others. There are more nuanced ones, and I think Al Jazeera is one of the more nuanced ones. But in that sphere, I think that the Arab bourgeois classes, Gulf capital, has been able to really set much of the agenda for how we discuss what we discuss.
Absolutely.
What we discuss.
And it's a seduction, right? Because I think part of what you're leading us into is being able to retain, you and I talked about this before, retain the ability to think and be able to be engaged in critical thinking and knowledge production under what feels like a totalizing regime. But at the same time, part of what I love what you're saying is that the way they've also gotten around this, the way they've been able to do this is through a consolidation of state power, because every single one of the media outlets you're talking about is an arm of the actual state. When you're talking about Al Jazeera, it is an arm of Qatar, and they can sort of position themselves as like, we're the good Gulf state, which I gotta say is not very hard when you're up against UAE sort of, traders. Talk about actual traders. That's not very hard to do, but they get that sort of social currency and that ability to say that while still, like you're saying, under the guise of civilizational discourse, that somehow we also, this is the part of them identifying with the civilizational discourse and white supremacy around this, is like, this is good journalism. We know how to do journalism. And my thing is like, who are you proving that to? Representing the enemy line is not good journalism, but there is a buy-in to that civilizational discourse because they were interested in consolidating a particular state that can vie with the powers, right? And say, and that, I mean, that was their FIFA thing. That was everything, was just sort of like, we are an actual state. Come look at us. Look at all these vessels we have that legitimize us as an actual state. The journalism has to do something with that. The other, in Lebanon, if you look at this, and folks in the region might know this, but I always mention this because a lot of times it's not known as intimately as it should be known. every single one of these channels is owned by a billionaire class oligarchs that are also warlords, that have always been part of the government class, that own, you know, telephone companies, communication companies, the trash, everything that makes the quote unquote state run are the same people oftentimes who run these channels. And so, but it can be missed as state consolidation of power, because you're just looking at it as like, and this is where I think there is a potential trap there too, of people, particularly in the imperial core, looking towards knowledge generated in the global south and mistaking it, like, just because it happens in Arabic. I used to say this to my students all the time in Doha, like, just because something's happening in Arabic doesn't make it decolonial or anti-colonial. Like, just because even though they will tell you, oh, this is not an import, we are generating our own knowledge here, the real question is part of what you're saying is, what is it shoring up? What is it recreating? And who and what is it inching out? Like, what knowledge are we then displacing because it becomes consolidated in the hands of Al Jazeera or MTV or LBC, and that looks like a legitimate source of information?
It just doesn't raise questions around, there's not a single, okay, maybe this is a big claim, so I don't want to make it, but
this is the channel to make your big claims.
Yeah, no, but it's empirically
I know it's not your style, yalla.
But I feel like, if we think of just the media agenda, just generally, just the idea, for the instance what I'm speaking of, having somebody, the Israeli military spokesperson, come and give his message to the Arab audiences, that is actually studied by Israel. What type of messaging works with Arab audiences? Is threat sometimes necessary? Is it a more religious message that uses the Quran? Is it things along those lines? And giving that in the midst of a war, in the midst of a genocide, this is a treacherous act. I mean, Israelis don't allow it. They don't permit any form of engagement with the position of Palestinians or Arabs or a spokesperson of the resistance coming into their own. They don't even allow, the coverage of specific events. It's all, curated. But, we've opened the door for an Israeli propaganda machine to work both directly and indirectly throughout our societies. And these media operations have, in fact, brought these Israeli voices in people's homes across the Arab world, from Iraq to Morocco, And that has an accumulated effect, whether we recognize that. I don't mean that people are now pro-Israel in the sense. I don't think that, but it actually lessens your cognitive, political forms of refusal for such engagement. And yes, it's sometimes satisfying to see some Arab media host taking down an Israeli guest. There is something along those lines, but still we're falling prey to an environment that is setting actually the questions, the political agendas. And what I wanted to say earlier about this grand claim is that also we're missing the real discussion, this discussion about circuits of capital, discussions about how Gulf capital has failed the Arab world and has been used to actually destroy much of our region. For instance, Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria has colluded with American and Israeli hegemony. All of that, that also capital should have been used to actually truly forge the grounds for the development of the Arab world at large. We don't discuss the actual structural political questions that should be asked, including the fact that, instead of blaming, for instance, resistance in Lebanon, this is a discussion in Lebanon, for attempting to back and stop a genocide, successful, not successful. That is the frame of the discussion in Lebanon. That's what people have to engage with. Even if you're, pro-resistance or you're not pro-resistance or you're in between somewhere. The terms of the discussion was, is it Hezbollah's fault or not for engaging in the fight? No. And I think that's a success because that places the onus of responsibility on the forces of resistance to justify, explain themselves, rather than the Arab bourgeois classes, for instance, Egypt, that continued to choke Gaza in the midst of everything that was unfolding, or Jordan, or the Gulf, or that basically. So it shifted the entire terms of the discussion, in which the shame really is for an Arab political and economic class that was very well satisfied in keeping the genocide happening as long as it doesn't really threaten the contours of power in their own society. So, this is the problem. One of the problems that we face in terms of normalization is that the people, the agenda setters, the research agenda setters in their world, the people who are engaging in conceiving and propagating media terms, the major questions of the day politically, are the well-funded counter-revolutionary, counter-resistance class in the Arab world. So that we cannot really remove, any discussion of how much foolishness we engage in writing in Arabic, for instance. Sometimes you have to write in Arabic just to engage with so much of that foolishness in which we are asking the wrong questions, setting the wrong agenda, and viewing reality in a very inverted way that permits eventually the habituation of our minds to cognitively accept that the only road towards some sort of quiet in the region is for resistance to surrender, is for Hamas to give up its weapons, is for Hezbollah to give up its weapons, is for the total collapse of any resistance organized specifically in Palestine, Lebanon, or beyond. That is a precondition on which we can have a lofty life.
Yeah, and these are the psychic inversions that are central to this work of violence, right? State violence, ensuring settler colonial futures at the expense of indigenous peoples and peoples of the region, versus rejecting the premise entirely. And I think that's part of what you're saying, is that with the sort of pumping in and normalizing of the presence of the settler state in and of itself. And I love how you're saying this is an intimate relationship when you pump it in. It's sort of like I'm thinking about Frantz Fanon using the radio. He was very well aware, like they were well aware, the FLN was well aware that using the radio to generate actual discourse and rhetoric of militancy was central, because it was so intimate. You were going into the inside spaces of people's homes. You're sort of showing the other side of that, is that when you pump in the presence of the settler state in an intimate way, even if it's critical, there's no other way than to think about their presence as being normative, even if it's in referential sort of antagonism around that. And we have an entire class that has done that. It's purposeful. It's a purposeful displacement into there, so that our energies are siphoned off and on the sort of defensive rather than offensive, transforming our resistance forces into the actual problem is another side of that, where people are engaging. But I really am interested in hearing your thoughts about this. Obviously, in Palestine, it's been many decades in the making, right? But this sort of emergence of let's say, the imperiousness of this class in Lebanon, which you and I had talked about before, about normalization being illegal. Like it's an actual law that you can't sort of say you want to normalize with the Zionist entity. These are things. So we have not seen, we've always known that fascists are been involved in this, right? That was what Sabra wa Shatila was, that we understand that there's a long history of normalization, not just normalization, actually working hand in hand with the settler state to destabilize Lebanon. But this level of blatant discourse, this level of imperiousness, this, fascistic ruling class coming and being so brazen about making their positions. And then, of course, making it seem through this media class, like those are the only voices that exist in Lebanon. If you watch the coverage on this, you'd think that 80% of Lebanon is pro-normalization, when we actually know it's the exact opposite. So I'm wondering what your sense is like, because it feels new in Lebanon, even though we know, like you're saying, it's been a long political, we know it's been a long time. But in this version, in this texture, it's new. It feels like it has rallied people in a different way, because I feel like people are jarred by how blatant it is, which is a texture that they haven't had to endure before. They've, in different ways, Hezbollah's the bad one. If Hezbollah were gone, your life would be better. You'd have your currency where it was. Yeah, right. You'd be able to not live in poverty. You'd have electricity, whatever psychic inversions they've worked on. But it does seem like it's playing a function. This blatant, disgusting, violent rhetoric has done something else with the people in a way that I have not seen. And I'm just wondering what your sense of it is, and especially as somebody watching from Palestine, because you said this is a historic moment. I mean, you and I weren't born in 67. We've seen it through our lifetimes what this looks like, right? And you're seeing it in real time start to happen in Lebanon. Like, how has that been? What's your sense of this moment? What's your sense of how it's created potentially something new to come into being?
Well, if we were a bit pessimistic, let's put it that way, there's multiple reasons for the permissibility of this to occur and unfold in Lebanon. First of all, I think for our own region, whether it's Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, just the sheer fact that 2011 is and will remain a quite historical, an important historical event in which the region, no matter the analytical lens through which we look at it, I know there's a lot of discussions and heated debates on Syria and on Egypt, but we had a rupture, whatever you want to call it, in politics. An entire, if you want, generation of Syrians, Egyptians, political activists, organized forms of politics, of labor unions, whether, again, in Egypt, Syria, and with wholesale events that came in succession, where society was in a highly weakened position. Syria was divided, in the civil war for years, still weak. Before 2023, Lebanon, you had a major economic crisis that was the fault of the very class that is now advocating for normalization as a solve-all. After they robbed, the Lebanese people, now they're selling them a new project for their salvation, which I think eventually, even if it works, it's going to be a failure. And for a lot of reasons, we can talk about that later. And it came at the heels of also, the ideological propagation of sectarianism across the region, this fault line between Sunni and Shia, with Syrian civil war, the perception in the Arab world, the trust, if you want, in the resistance axis that, is animated with forces that are tied with the Iranian Revolution, and all prepared the ground, if you want, for a new form of and deepening of a politics of normalization as we see it today. There's a loss, if you want, of trust in all the major institutions, including that of resistance. So, and this is the pessimistic view, and I'm not saying here that all the people lost, trust in the resistance, but including in resistance, including in the ability of resistance to stand, to create the correct forms of decision, to make strategic choices that are aligned with what is possible in the wake of October 7th, to not be penetrated on terms of intelligence, as we saw unfold with Hezbollah. So there was a weakening. There is this kind of feeling of a strong, monstrous Israel capable of using organized violence in ways that we haven't seen before. Technologically advanced, backed by the entire West, and of course, permitted to commit these acts through the complicity of these Arab bourgeois classes. And at the same time, the resistance forces, showed a lot of vigor, a lot of courage, a lot of fight, a lot of also tactical agility, persistence, and remain in the field. But at the same time, there is this shaking, if you want, of some of the confidence, both on the heels of the Arab revolts since 2011, the breakdown of states, the weakening of the cohesiveness of society, for instance, in many parts. I mean, if you go to Syria, for instance, in Jabal al-Druz, now people are, putting Israeli flags, as part of that kind of sectarian politics. And we cannot really run away from these questions. There is definitely a context to why the Druze are raising these flags. And I'm here not trying to not speak of it in nuance or anything like that. But at the same time, it is a symptom of how, our region, Bilad al-Sham, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, have really gone through a series of war that have really devastated societies at a core level. In Lebanon, it was both economic, and of course, with the current war, also devastation in the south. In Syria, it was a civil war that really weakened, divided, and will continue to divide Syria for the foreseeable future. And in Palestine, it's a political division and colonial fragmentation that is very obvious, that has left people feeling more isolated, more atomistic, less trust in any institution, whether it's the bank, whether it's the state, whether it's the... But at the same time, and this is the surprising, if you want, factor, at least in Palestine, and perhaps this is also a process in Lebanon, despite the fact that we have a major, complete rejection of the political class that rules us, we still think as a society the solution is in the same political class. It wouldn't be surprising to speak, if you speak to people just normal, on an everyday level here in Palestine, is that their critique of the PA goes as far as accusing it of being a treacherous regime. And at the same time, the solution lies in that treacherous regime. But it tells me something. It tells me something that it is because of the absence of any other form of organized politics, social movements that actually can appear as an alternative in the context of the West Bank. In the context of Lebanon, there's these kind of, Lebanese banking crisis, corruption, the arrangements since Al-Ta'if, Hezbollah's positioning throughout. A lot of, there's a lot of critique to Hezbollah, both being part of this system, but, taking a step far, but also legitimating it in the past decade or so. And with all of these things blowing in the Lebanese social context, legitimate, of course, critiques have been launched at how can be reconciled between a resistance movement that has, revolutionary slogans, that want social justice, that wants to create the conditions for, more cross national solidarities, etc., and its ability to also collude in many ways with the state in a ways that is beneficial to it. Of course, there is the argument from those that engage in this is that that was necessary. It's politics, it's pragmatic, etc. All of these different things that, can be placed front and center. So in 2023, when we come to the moment of the Tufan, the Tufan comes at this specific moment. Organized politics is not really something significant in Egypt. Everybody is either in Europe or, has ran away or is in prison, or was killed. All the activists, all the major political organizations, they had, since the violence of a Sisi regime emerged, they had to flee. In the context of Syria, civil war, in the context of Lebanon, economic, social fragmentation, and political devastation. And I think that also impacted all organized forms of politics, including resistance movements. So as we come to that moment, the space was open for also these media billionaire operations that are actually the class responsible, for instance, directly for what happened to the Lebanese currency. They're directly responsible for people not being able to access, their accounts and their savings. Are the same ones who are financing now the politics of anti-Hezbollah, anti-resistance, and making sure that the question of normalization with Israel becomes the primary question on the minds and the backs of people. So I think that picture is also important, at least to understand the context into which this question comes. It comes on the heels of many shocks, massacres, killings, violence, destruction.
Right. Yeah, I think it's actually really important to continuously draw the history, because it feels jarring when you look at it and you're just like, where the fuck did this come from? And then for us, having lived in the region and sort of tracked it, this is precisely like that sets up the possibility also that you said is a capture of the mind, is a capture of the possibilities. These are the foreclosures, right? I mean, if we think about it as a structural piece, sort of, this is what I'm obsessed with, as you know, intruding on our interiority and reconfiguring even the possibilities that we have to work with. You can hate the ruling class, as people in Palestine and Lebanon do. You don't have one conversation. Like, I've yet to meet somebody in Lebanon or Palestine who's just like, oh yeah, our warlords are awesome. I love them. I get so much. You met one? Okay, maybe we can talk. I mean, the fascists end up sort of giving them love, but like in terms of their everyday life, they understand the relational coercion that's involved, and that they have to sort of, engage in these submissive acts to get anything. In Lebanon, for example, the sectarian, I mean, you know this, but I'm saying this for our audience who might not know this, is the sectarian sort of leadership class that hold and basically the power to do anything for you, including placing your kids in schools, getting you a job, paving your roads in small rural areas. It is a sort of fiefdom class situation where you need to have allegiance to them so that you can get any social services. So, and people resent them for that, but then still sort of show their allegiance in some ways. But rather than just reading it on sectarian lines or tribal aspects, which definitely are galvanized and sort of mobilized in particular ways in very specific moments too, there also is a way that you're talking about the capture of the mind in a foreclosure about what is possible. And so people just always end up back in like, these are the same people, or corollaries of them, or like offshoots of them. So you'll have like somebody's daughter or somebody's son of these like, these sort of aristocratic classes, particularly in Lebanon, doing something and it looks like it's new. I like that you also brought up the situation in 2011. And I think also, if you can think about Hezbollah 2006 being a very important turning point, and if we have the last decade of them sort of joining the quote unquote government where there is legitimate criticism about this, is that also comes off the heels of a Saudi-US disinformation campaign, because in 2006, they had a major victory against the Zionist entity. And people were very much galvanized by a force that sort of reminded of them of when the Zionist settler state was ejected from Lebanon and we got our land back, right? So here in 2006, you have another version of this. They put up an excellent fight. They kick them out again. And then the US and Saudi decides, oh shit, the last thing we need is people doing what you just said, is believing in resistance again. And not necessarily the configuration of Hezbollah, but the fact that resistance is possible. The fact that the Zionist entity and imperial machinations are not the only, person in town or the only way that this can unfold. And so they launch into a massive campaign that includes and mobilizes, this is the mobilization part of anti-Shia racism. That was central to it. And I think obviously we see a version of this in Palestine, the Hamas, for different reasons, different angles, different channels. But there is this, as part of the normalizing class, this psychic element, this cognitive element of capturing possibilities seem to be really important too.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, but I think the condition for that is first to render people feeling helpless. You know, like that's the first, that's the last, if you want, because again, this is what I was trying to point out in my final kind of comment, is that we see those very institutions that we hate and despise and critique, and if we start to see them as the institutions that will actually provision us with salvation. And I mean, think about it as the Lebanese state presenting itself as the state that can actually get Lebanon out of this war, you know? So there's this wholesale destruction, Lebanon is being bombed, Beirut is being attacked, and
not Iran. Iran has no business doing this, right?
no, I mean, of course, but I mean, before Hezbollah re-engaged, I mean, in the current, you know, Ramadan war and what happened with Iran, I mean, for 15 months, Lebanon was still being bombed, and the entire discourse, the Lebanese state enters and says, "I have a solution. Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun, we're gonna go and, you know, talk to the Israelis, and we're gonna bring peace to Lebanon." And the problem is with Hezbollah because it refuses to hand its weapons. Like, so it is actually engaging in this. I am the savior. I am the one that can actually bring us out of this conflict and mess. And of course, it has ideological power behind it, which is Lebanese nationalism, for instance. The idea of speaking in terms that, you know, of Lebanon first, that Lebanon should be concerned with itself. Lebanon should be neutral. Lebanon should be a wonderful space, a Switzerland, you know, that nobody touches and everybody loves because it's beautiful, as Samir Jaja told us. That's why the Israelis want to attack it. So like or that's why the Americans love it, to be more accurate. Samir is Jaja, he's one of the head of the Phalangist parties in Lebanon. So, you know, these are the discourses that came to the fourth. But there's also a problematic, I mean, here I'm speaking more to Palestine because I think, at least in Lebanon, of course, there's still an organized political resistance. There's a bit of a active social, labor, civil movements that also are in existence and still operating in Beirut, etc. There's a larger environment that backs resistance, even if it disagrees with many of the policies that Hezbollah does. So there's a large contingency of Lebanese from all backgrounds that are, you know, with the resistance in this fight. And it's not insignificant, of course. It's a very significant contingency and remains loyal to this idea and remains quite active. But it is the fact that, you know, this kind of paradox of being helpless to the sense through which violence as an organizing principle of settler colonialism, it's used in this mass scale, this machinic AI industrialized way that Israel has been used, committing massacres and calibrating it, whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Palestine, and therefore, you know, creating the conditions through which people simply want to survive. And in that survival mode, the very same institutions that you completely digress with and completely have problematics feel like a safety net, feel like the last net through which you can actually hang to. I mean, recently I've been, you know, heading some local trips here in Turkey, Jenin, other places, and this is the discourse of people, just generally. It's the discourse of the PA is bad, but, you know, the PA should do more at the same time. The PA is bad, but the PA should do more. It's that paradox of finding not in our own social makeup the answer to our problematics through, I don't know, social solidarity, through organizing. I mean, in our context here as well, because any form of organizing is, you know, even if it's, you know, it's quite.
I mean, it's crushed immediately. Yeah.
Even if it's not overtly political, if it just binds people in a way that seems a bit subversive, it's crushed. And in this sense, and it's easier to crush because the Israelis can come in, and there's this whole, you know, class of security service personnel that also operate on the level to to crush, inform, and make sure that anything that any Palestinian does is surveilled and therefore easily made legible and easily targeted. But what it is the condition to which you create this helplessness in people.
Yes. Yeah.
But also, it wouldn't appear without all of these historical events,
right,
and without these comparisons. So for Lebanon, for instance, is like, if we look at the historic moment that we're in, a lot of Lebanese do not want normalization with Israel. That's true.
Right.
They don't want the peace agreement with Israel, but they want the war to stop. And they see something along the lines of Egyptian, for instance, peace agreement where, people are still not friendly to the Israelis. There's a cold peace, as they call it, a model, maybe without the recognition and the embassies, but, something along those lines. It's something that I think a lot of Lebanese, a no war, no peace type of situation, where also resistance in the future will be much more tamed in any, discourse around liberation of Palestine, for instance. Like, I think that is something that even Hezbollah now has backtracked from, at least overtly. Not in the sense that it's not still a principal organizing thing, but not in their media statements. They have accepted this kind of, discussion under this whole Lebanese nationalism. Again, this is part of the problem sometimes that a lot of movements, but also intellectuals do, is that we accept the terms of the discussion. We accept speaking through, for instance, Lebanese nationalism as an organizing principle.
Right.
Lebanese, and I'm not, I'm not against Lebanese national. Well, I am. But,
so good. Exactly. Yes, we are. It's good.
I mean, I'm also against Palestinian nationalism, but in the sense of like the sense that I see us as one people.
Yes, exactly.
I think that these kind of manufactured, I don't know,
nation states,
nation states are, something that we shouldn't really invest so much emotionally with. But anyways, it's in the sense of, you're accepting the terms of the discussion.
Exactly.
I mean, you accept the terms of the discussion, you're also accepting what it's load bearing. It has a lot of different connotations to it.
Right.
So this is, I think this is the thing. If I'm looking at Lebanon from this, from the angle of Palestine from here, I am seeing the opening of the space. It's not totally surprising, given the circumstance. It's not totally surprising, given the amount of devastation Lebanese society has been under economically and politically. The desperation of people, like it's, economic deprivation, massacres. And there's the state that tells them, I have the solution. Of course, it's the wrong solution, not only on political, ethical principle. It's the wrong solution because the solution actually lies in people taking back their own money from the political class that has robbed them and sent their money across banks in Europe and across the world, is actually in changing the formula of politics in Lebanon in a radical way. It's not in actually surrendering and kneeling in front of Israel, because also the Israel that some Lebanese think they know is not the same Israel that is actually in existence.
Right.
Like it is surprising that, yes, a lot of Lebanese right-wing phalangists wanted to, again, with this whole, village analogy I gave, we're in a fight with our neighbor. There's this big neighbor next to us. We want to use that power against, our internal rival or enemy. And a lot of the phalangists saw in Israel, a natural ally for a lot of different reasons. And they've engaged with Israel in multiple historical episodes, including in the Civil War, culminating in actual peace agreement that I think was signed in 1983. I'm not sure the date. But of course, it failed. And Bashir Gemayel, who was the president who signed it, was assassinated and killed at that time. But what I was trying to say is that they think it's the same Israel that was also. I mean, Israel actually, in fact, today has real intentions of occupying, expanding, and building settlements into Lebanon.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is a project in the next year. I'm saying that that is a futuristic
That's their goal.
project.
Yeah.
It is a goal.
Yeah.
It's not only about a buffer zone. The buffer zone will become 2 buffer zones in the future. It has that intention of controlling more space and ensuring the security of its own settlements that are actually part of its security complex in the north of the Galilee and historic Palestine. But slowly they want to move into also southern Lebanon and actually create the conditions for settlers to go there. Again, this will have to take a process within Israel, but there is a real intention for that. And what I think a lot of Lebanese don't understand is that the type of ideology that really motivates much of Israelis today, the type of consensus within Israeli society, the type of security doctrine that emerges is quite different than the Israel that they actually dealt with. And the only reason why they engaged in any negotiations with Lebanon recently is that because they thought that they wanted to actually diffuse politically the track that the Iranians managed to actually create by imposing some sort of limitations on the freedom of action of Israel committing massacres in Lebanon. And they wanted to create some sort of political symbolic win for the Israelis, which the Lebanese state unfortunately was happy to give without any real concession on parts of.
Totally. It's like Anja Amlu Shi. They barely did anything on the side, the Zionist side.
Honestly, they make the Oslo team that negotiated look
Anjad, which is something. Is saying something.
I'm not here being a Palestinian chauvinist, but maybe our negotiators, as stupid as they were less stupid than yours. So
I'm right on. Right on. This is there's no competition. And can I tell you why? Because we have Oslo as an example. Okay. So it's not like, new terrain and we're going in there and there's all this sort of shit. It's like, have you seen what has happened? But this goes back to our point, to what we have been talking about this being a long-term political project, that it's not about, we just don't see the problems. We don't see the trouble. We don't see what could happen. There is a consolidation of a particular social and political blueprint that has been worked on for a very long time. You're right around the issue that the selling point becomes nationalism from multiple sides, by the way, right? The selling point of like our liberation of Lebanon, which is an important piece, is the sovereignty of Lebanon, but that becomes consolidated around just Lebanon, and then the Palestine as a centerpiece and our liberation running through Quds, through Jerusalem, falls to the wayside. There's a way in which that is meant to capture Lebanese, irrespective of their position on the resistance, sort of mobilizing this idea of, land theft, which again is problematic. Neither of us are saying it's not, becomes mobilized through this nationalist discourse. And that's the selling point, which is the same as of course, the right-wing piece and the Druze piece. You had mentioned the Druze piece, and this is welcome space here with your fellow Druzi talking about this. Is like, it's the same thing that was sold to the Druze of Palestine, right? Where you have this sort of like, you are going to get a kingdom on yourself. You will have your own nation. Of course, we know that was a lie. It has always been a lie. There's the same sort of mobilization of that nationalist discourse within the context of the larger sovereignty of Lebanon itself. So last year when we went to Lebanon in the Jabal, where I'm from, which is primarily Druze and Maronite, for the first time ever, we were seeing Druze flags being put up, like flags as in like marking, you use a flag for a nation. For the first time in my life, we were seeing Druze flags mobilized as like nationalist sort of markers of this is where we're at, which to me was incredibly scary, because that's a different type of mobilization. And of course, it's a counter mobilization against anti-Zionist Druze and Druze who refuse, normalization, and Druze who have been fighting all along, unlike the narrative of the Zionist state that tells you all Druze are our friends, right? but these nationalist discourses, or having a Christian sort of, you know, space to themselves and within Lebanon, this is the sort of texture that you're really pointing to and saying, like, this is why we need to be precise around the nationalist discourse. Yes, partially because of what you and I both, you know, agree on about these borders being, that's the point, is reject the premise of these borders that disconnected us to begin with, but also because this is the trap that we're falling into. And this is what is being pumped in and sort of mobilized and animated in very particular ways. And there's a real danger in that, because we also know, and this has become clear now from the United States saying this, even though we've known this for a long time, is that they've also been, as they're sort of, you know, complaining about Hezbollah having arms and all of that, we know they've also been arming, you know, right-wing Christian militias for years. And so this is what's also fomenting internally in Lebanon, and can be stoked by this nationalist discourse.
Yeah, I mean, it could, and it could also reach the level of some sort of civil strife and conflict, specifically if there's a calculation that with the change in Syria, with Hezbollah being weakened, with, you know, Israel being incapable of actually really truly defeating Hezbollah, that there's a need for kind of an Lebanese infighting to actually push it forward. And this is a real risk. I'm not downgrading it, but I still don't think that Lebanon will go there because of the experience of the civil war that was there, and because it's not necessarily, you know, the place to which you know, any form of real outcome will come that is changed. But I think that the other parties in Lebanon that are anti-resistance sense a certain weakness, and they want to squeeze as much as possible in terms of weakening, delegitimating, and cornering Hezbollah, and trying to actually feed into this project of at least taming its political and military arm in a way that would make it palatable for them, you know, to garner some sort of financial extraction as well from circuits of capital that will be tied to this kind of disarming Hezbollah. So there's also a financial incentive. There's also an incentive that ties to just intra-Lebanese politics. And of course, what you were mentioning, I think, is quite important, is that one of the strongest circuits for this alliance, growing discourse for normalization and acceptance for it, is always, I mean, sectarianism is the perfect place for them. These form of identities that people are associated with, when these kind of larger, ideational projects kind of seem to fail, people turn back to them. They give a sense of safety, a sense of it's tied to also family structures. It's tied to millennia of relations in our region, and the rise of empires and their dwindling, people changing their religion, specific historical processes that and the psyches that come with it. And it's not necessarily, it is of course something that is reinforced, constructed, and amplified through a modern colonial project, but it's something that is also in many ways that pre-exist, not in the specific form it takes, and therefore it's easily exploitable by Israel. And that happened to the Jews of Palestine, who were one of the foremost revolutionaries in 1936, for instance, 1939. And then in the wake of a Nakba, and in the years of the Nakba, some of their leaders actually take the choice of colluding with the Haganah and the militias, Zionist militias, and creating this kind of pact through which the Jews supposedly will gain some sort of favor, remain in their villages, and eventually, of course, participate through this mandatory service in the Israeli military. But of course, even until now, despite years and decades of parts of that community being heavily loyal to the state of Israel and serving and etc., a Jewish soldier can go back home and still find an Israeli bulldozer coming to, destroy his home because there's no licenses for Arab villages to expand their, built up environment because of a statewide policy where Arab land is being, robbed from its owners, including the Jewish community, for instance. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is that within this kind of ethno-national state, no matter how much you give to the state itself, you're still rendered a subject outside of its full, complete economic, political, and civic rights. Right. But beyond that, I think, sectarianism plays a role. And of course, in Lebanon, it has been and always will remain not always remain sectarian, but always will remain through this kind of configuration, a place where there are people in Lebanon that see in some sort of natural affinity with Israel.
Right.
I mean, it is, it's an awkward moment for them because the whole world has turned against Israel.
Exactly. It's just like, guys, like, get with the program. But maybe this is a good segue into, you were saying before that you feel like even if this goes forward, that it's going to be a failure, that it's not going to go well for the Lebanese state. It's not going to go well for the Zionist entity, that this isn't going to unfold in, let's say, their fantastical colonizer mind where these like magical solutions happen and people are going to be on board. Does this have something to do with it, that you're saying like, okay, the entire world, like the global majority sees the Zionist entity for what it is. The global majority is with Palestine. The global majority is against this, carnage that they are able to exact because they're supported by the most cruel empire in the world, which also the majority of the world sees as that at this point. Does that have something to do with it? And knowing you, I'm sure there are other parts of this analysis that are really important about why the failure.
Because I think, first of all, the problem with analysis generally, and the problem with our current historical conjuncture specifically, is that Israel has and is seeking, it doesn't mean that it will succeed, but it's seeking to actually change the paradigm and relations, not only with Lebanon, not only with Syria, not only in attempting to defeat the axis of resistance, but even with countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey. So it is seeing the entire region, even these states that are actually part of the American architecture, as threats, as things that they have to actually rework in a way that favors what they actually really want. An expansion of their borders, first. Second, an ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And maybe even Palestinians inside Israel. That's the second. And third, a military dominance that is unmatched in the whole region without any kind of contention and with freedom action beyond its expanded borders. So this is the project. This is the project that they're laying out in the next 15 years. And maybe they won't get it. I mean, Israel is still pragmatic enough to settle for something less. I'm not saying that. But this is the organizing principle through which they're working. They are working for a greater Israel. They are working to reconfigure the way the region has established specific constraint limits on the Israeli state. They don't like the fact that, for instance, Egypt shut down its borders and didn't allow Palestinians into the Sinai, for instance. They wanted to get rid of the Palestinians there. That would have been an easier option. They don't like the fact that they have to settle into these kind of peace agreements with country like Jordan, where they also cannot really throw the Palestinians from the West Bank easily into Jordan. They want borders that are more defensible, so that means more expansion. Once they expand, the problem with that expansion mentality is that there's always more reason to expand. And also there is something psychic, if you want. I mean, for people who've read Nasser Abu Rahma's Beneath the Concrete, which is a beautiful book, good theorization of how Israelis are stuck in this kind of foundational moment where they cannot really normalize their own state and they need to use these tools of violence and expansion. And I was, in many ways, I was in agreement with Nasser, but we had a conversation where I also thought there is a psychic addiction to the form. I don't think the settler wants to stop being a settler. There is an addiction to the settlering itself, and that addiction is also psychic. The idea of playing petty gods, of playing, in the hills of the West Bank. So if the Palestinians in the West Bank disappear, they'll have to play it somewhere else. Maybe it's the hills of Syria, maybe it's the hills of Lebanon and the mountains of Lebanon. And the nature of the society, demographically and politically, Israeli society, is changing. It is becoming more religious, more right-wing, more messianic by the day. Many of the Tel Aviv, there was this reel on Instagram where a Lebanese girl says they party like us, and it's
they look like us, they party like us. Yeah.
I mean, they look like her, not us, but in the sense of that kind of connection with this kind of Tel Aviv city on the beach. But those people in Tel Aviv are a lot of them are leaving. They're not staying. They're not having kids. Demographically, Israel is changing. It is more going to the right, and demographically speaking, it's one of the only countries with an advanced economy that has actually larger birth rates because of this kind of deliberate national policy instituted by both the ultra-Orthodox but also the Zionist religious component, and that is the future of Israel. That is the in 2 decades, in 3 decades, if Israel remains what it is, that is the future of Israel. So what peace are you talking about? With whom? It's a peace that will postpone another fight with Lebanon without anybody instigating it in a decade or two. That's the only peace that we're talking about. And imagine that this political class just simply doesn't understand it. They think that Americans can constrain Israel. I don't think Israel is now building in its own edifice this idea that we want to be autonomous, that we want to be independent of American power to some degree, that we want to, and that despite the fact that it also has a lot of influence on American politics, and that's perhaps changing, but it senses the reality, and whether it can solve its contradictions is a different story. But you're trying to actually conduct a strategic agreement with a state that is now reconsidering the 1978 Camp David Accords with Egypt as not beneficial to it. That is now considering that the Oslo agreements are things that they need to get rid of. Of course, this is something that has always been there, but also the Wadi Araba agreement with Jordan. Also, they're the ones that want to rupture all of these different agreements. And I don't find it well for the Arab bourgeois class that they still think in these terms, or simply rely on American power as a limit case on Israel. And I think the only guarantee that we in the region could have in the future, defensive, not even an offensive, liberationist, I don't want to go into that type of, we need to liberate ourselves, although sometimes being offensive is a defensive act. But what I'm trying to say is that the only thing that we have actually defensively is organized resistance.
Yeah.
That is the only guarantee through which Israel can be actually limited. So what the Lebanese state is doing is like what Mahmoud Abbas has done to the West Bank, is creating the conditions for a massacre without a battle.
Yeah.
And that's a much more tragic, people look at what happened in Gaza and still think that in the West Bank, look, people have, although, today a martyr was killed in Ramallah, 15-year-old, a child by Israeli military, but, in the city here. But, it's still calmer or thing, the wholesale destruction. But that's just a moment in time.
Yeah.
The moment in time that we're in. And I'm not here trying to be catastrophic and apocalyptic about it. The fact is that there's a intensive buildup of settler infrastructure with the intention to race. People forget that, the genocidal machine didn't come as a reaction. It is a set up policy.
Right.
It's not a, oh, they woke up in the morning, let's do a genocide. It is a set of
It was the
policies.
logical extension of everything they had set up prior to that. I mean, I actually don't read this. You know me, I'm not a pessimistic leftist. I don't read this as pessimism. I read this as precision. And I read this as precision in both directions of one, like, listen to the architects of oppression when they tell you exactly what they're going to do, rather than reach somewhere else to try and like reimagine what the possibilities, or not sort of be able to take in the magnitude of what they're promising, right? I mean, Nadia Abul Hajj is sort of facts on, that's the whole point. It's facts on the ground. You articulate it, you build towards it. You happen to have an empire that has endless resources to pour into you to do this. Like you're saying, you can also then jockey for autonomy as though you've been so makbutin, right? Like you've been so victimized and held back. Poor settler colony. You haven't been able to do all the destruction you've wanted to do at the pace you wanted to do it, whenever the fuck you wanted to do it, right? That's the articulation of that. But the precision is also that if we know the intent and if we can track it, this organized resistance against it actually has more potential. And kind of in the same ways, like you're saying, is that when we get pulled to be arguing about shit that doesn't even matter through the premise that is already set up for us, the parameters that are already set up for us, this is this other version of that in correctly and precisely articulating the goal, if there's organized resistance against it, or a psychic and, let's say, libidinal and affective investment in the possibility of that, it needs to be mobilized around this precision. Because then what are you fighting? Like you actually are taken off the scent on purpose of what you're actually fighting. Then you're fighting all these little fucking things that don't matter, while they're solidly moving forward in the direction that they're going to move forward, and they're galvanizing everything at their fingertips to be able to do that, right? So there's something really important about the reality testing that comes with this, and I think it's a necessary place to start if we're committed to continued struggle for liberation.
Yeah, I mean, and also if we want to say, have a chance to survive, it's not like, people think that because here there's this like capital R resistance as this kind of enchanting concept, romantic. It has this idealistic aspect to it, and there's sometimes a fear around, for me, around making resistance like the capital R revolution, this kind of all enchanting concept through which people, give all their energies and bodies and sacrifice, and sometimes kill in the name of revolution in the wrong directions. Like it happened throughout history that revolutionaries sometimes are excessive, etc. I'm not even here talking about this. Is why I like sometimes it's like small R resistance, which is, it is a necessity. This is what people should understand. It is a necessity. Doesn't matter who organizes it, whether they're leftists, whether they're, it matters. I mean, I'm not saying these ideological things don't matter. I don't mean people's dispositions don't matter. Your capacity to mobilize, to the consequences of, instance, adopting some ideologies, it alienates some people, it brings to the fold others. But I'm just trying to say that it's a necessity. It's a necessity for Lebanon to be able to resist not only the possibility, but an actual intentional, historic, but also futuristic intent on the part of the Israeli state and those who lead it of taking much of its land, if not most of its land, and of expanding demographically, of bringing more settlers in, of expanding through natural growth, of making dozens of babies for each woman. Like there is a concerted, and in time, maybe it's not in 10 years, maybe it's 20 years, but in time, that the possibilities for these expansions become more palatable for a state with a machinic, imperial-backed, but also this kind of wedding of messianic ideology with high tech that Israel seems to be able to master. So it's a challenge for all of us. It's a necessity before anything else. So for me, it's not necessarily even like an ideological disposition around, yes, I am, of course, liberation of Palestine, etc. Like it's not
Right.
but why I don't say that politically, because there is also an element to that. Although it appeared for us on October 7th that liberation, the dream itself, came into the fold and became more real. No, there's something in speaking about liberation of Palestine, or sacrificing yourself on the altar of Palestine, when I think that one of the most important and central also elements of why we need resistance is that it's in necessity. Whether it's in Lebanon, whether it's in Jordan, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Egypt, because the very political class that runs Israel today is thinking. I mean, every couple of days there are statements in think tanks and in political intellectual circles around, we're going to be in war with Egypt in 15 years. Why? Why are you going to be in war with Egypt? What did Egypt do? Nothing. They're buying your gas. They didn't do anything.
It's not submissive enough, Abboud. It's not submissive enough.
Yeah, no, but it's like, because they already understand is that they have territorial ambitions, they have demographic ambitions, and at the same time, demographic ambitions in the sense that they want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. And of course, I mean, in Lebanon, they already ethnically cleansed the Lebanese. If they remain in this area, they've basically ethnically cleansed, tens of thousands of Lebanese people. So like in a nutshell, there is a concerted political program. We should listen to what they say, but also to what they're doing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, Israel sometimes is pragmatic, but with the current political class that they have, and with an opposition that only outdoes them, and even when they actually are in disagreement with Netanyahu, is that you didn't kill enough Lebanese today. That's why we're in disagreement. So this is the state that we're dealing with, and I think the software hasn't updated for people in Lebanon, in the political bourgeois class in Lebanon. It hasn't updated in the sense of they haven't really updated the sense of Israel they have. It's not. It's not the old labor pioneers, socialist with colonial settler, of course, and ability to massacre Palestinians, but this kind of like more, even if you want, liberal, face forward, pragmatic type of Zionism that is now in
Do you think that it hasn't updated, which I think for some people is true, but also like the Epstein class, there's capital involved. There's other types of currency that they are willing to trade off their people, the most central things. Like there's an amoral political, right? Not even immoral, amoral political calculus that they're making as well. For some of them, they are deluded. There's fantastical, magical thinking happening. But I do think that when we're talking about a billionaire class, like Lebanon, Lebanon, as Israel's sort of obsessed with saying, we're such a tiny country. But like Lebanon is super small and has 8 to 12 billionaires. That feels so deeply problematic in that. And of course, they're embedded in this entire system. So is there that angle of it too? Like there's an actual calculus involved in what's to be gained, even as odious and heinous as it is for us to think about, which it then also opens up questions for me about a different type of fight and a different type of resistance, small r and big R, that we should be engaged in when we're thinking this is a particular class of people that are invested in a different type of win.
No, I mean, of course, I mean, there's, we cannot, I mean, when here, of course, there is an element that is a class strategy and a technique of control.
Right.
Even in pushing this kind of anti-Hezbollah discourse, which kind of blamed Hezbollah for everything that happened in Lebanon in the past 20 years. From the outset, not only in terms of the last 2 years, even the economic crisis, even the collapse, even there is a strategy. I mean, in Lebanon generally, I mean, that kind of a class strategy where sectarianism fuses with how the bourgeois classes survive and collude at the same time, and vision the basis through which they can accumulate capital. And I do think that on some level they see in the relationship with Israel and provisioning security services for Israel an extractive method through which there could be opportunities for the accumulation of more capital, whether through shared agreements on the gas fields that also exist across the Lebanese shore, or whether it's through the securitization of the state in the service of Israel itself, and the money and the budgets that might come along with that through an American financed Egyptian type of agreement where hundreds of millions will be pumped into the Lebanese economy as a result, and that they would benefit. I mean, I'm not saying that is
Right.
not part and parcel of the way they're thinking, but having said that, I think that there's also a old formalic, very unupdated understanding of the nature and the character of Israel as it now operates politically, but also in the way it thinks its ambition. And I'm not saying that this class really cares about Israel eating up parts of Lebanon. They don't. But I don't think that they're that invested in that as such. I don't think they actually care much, and they're more than satisfied and okay with Lebanese being unable to go back to their villages, etc. But what I'm saying is that on the level of some parts of the political class, not necessarily only the capitalist class that runs, that has vested interests, that they do actually have an unupdated version of the Israelis that they actually think that they're leading with, which they historically have dealt with, but have actually changed in terms of character, in terms of ideological orientation, in terms of being unhappy with the constraints of the current American established order, and they want to tear it down. So good luck with the agreement. Yeah.
And Jad, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, I also think it will fail because the current dynamics just simply say that with Hezbollah being able to inflict costs on the Israeli military in the south, with Iran's steadfastness and being unafraid of returning to war if that is mandated, that the possibility of choking Israel in the south and creating the conditions for their withdrawal might take some time, but eventually it's something that is actually achievable.
Yes.
Without any agreement with Israel.
Right.
And I think that yes, there is, of course, with a lot of contingencies, Israel is more capable of tolerating casualties. It's more capable of tolerating different elements, but to some degree, the Iranian Hezbollah strategy in the current war, whether on the tactical level, but also in tying each of the fronts together, was relatively successful in at least taming, containing, and constraining. And I think that is part of the incentive, at least for Israel as well, to engage with the Lebanese state, although they know very well that the entire agreement is a farce. It's kind of a symbolic understanding. Of course, concessions, it delegitimizes Hezbollah, but at the same time, what it does for Israel is it gives Netanyahu some sort of breathing space to justify not being able to totally engage in Lebanon and have freedom of action. And actually, so the situation in Lebanon is more, if you want, going in the direction of the resistance forces. And I think part of the Lebanese desperation of the state was actually to sign it very soon, because they wanted to circumvent what is happening in terms of the Iranian-American negotiations. And of course, the Americans are interested in hollowing out a lot of what they agreed with the Iranians in the MOU. So they're doing and engaging in that as well. So this is why it came forward, this agreement. But I think it is basically dead as it's born, because the party concerned with it will not actually engage with it unless, I don't know, Hezbollah, I don't know, concedes on that. But I don't see that happening.
Sounds very unlikely. I mean, it feels to me like what you're gifting us here is precisely how we do small r resistance, is retaining a level of clarity, being able to think on multiple levels at the same time, reading sort of relational and political configurations, recognizing they're constantly in movement, recognizing the quote unquote pragmatist approaches that politics involves, the historical element of it. All of this seems to be necessary because these sorts of events do snuff out. I mean, it closes down something on purpose. It collapses. There's a psychic collapse that happens when something like this, like an agreement or something like this, is signed. And I think it doesn't allow us to think in these ways. It's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on. And I wish we had done it before, but this won't be the last time, obviously, I have you. But in our sort of winding down, Abboud, is there anything else you'd leave folks with analytically? I know you also have a couple books coming out. I want folks to know that it is in the bio, in the show notes, but and not just because we're buddies on Pluto, but also because I'm just very excited to have your books in the world. But is there anything else analytically you would have folks sort of pay attention to, have their heads up about, antennas up, anything?
I mean, I think that, we spoke a lot about the historical process of normalization and some of the psychological aspects of it, but also a lot of what it means to normalize generally is this kind of habituation to a condition. And it is about this like everyday acceptance, accommodation with a reality that seems endless, that can't be stopped, and where you don't have any agency to really change.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, for many in Palestine, for instance, and this is from our experience as a warning sign, is that this is where people are more more accepting of ideas that they wouldn't be accepting before. So I mentioned, or incapable of feeling a sense of shock and solidarity and empathy with others, a sense of capacity to actually commit to collective action together. The problem with what Israel demands of us, just generally, when it speaks of normalization, it actually wants to turn us into zombie-like creatures.
Yeah.
Into people without the capacity to love in this kind of collective sense, to imagine together, to have a sense of groundedness in reality together, to act together in the world. And it will always see in any form of us coming together, not only as Arabs, but even people in Lebanon among each other, a threat to its existence.
Right.
It's paranoid lens through which it looks at the world. It is a paranoid lens through which it views any form of assertion of our subjectivity in the world in a way that is actually effective, but not only politically, in any way possible. It is a threat. And therefore, on some level, it will crush our societies, devastate it, and remake it in a way that actually will make it more pitiful. And this is the process that I witnessed in the West Bank, the process of depoliticization, the process of helplessness, the learned helplessness, the pedagogy of terror that we live under, the pedagogy of, don't think because thinking could lead into dangerous roads. This is the pedagogy under which we lived. And it's creating, if you want, a much more harsher, crueler society, less capable of coming together. Yes, there are these moments. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to give this kind of wholly pessimistic picture. We have ways to come and act together and all of these different things, but it is a cooler society. It's a society that is much more unfazed by events, unfazed by things happening around them. And I think that is a warning sign for all of us in the region. If that's the road through which,
Right.
this is the road through which, this is the precondition for what normalizing with Israel means, is for us to actually become something else.
Yeah.
And that becoming could be slow, but it's becoming where we sell parts of ourselves, we give up a specific understanding of our own identity in relation to the world, of justness, of ethics, of our capacity to stand for truth, all of the different things, and it's
Right.
a betrayal of ourselves. And yes, at times there is the convenient excuse. I mean, Arab states have done that in the past, where they displace that kind of self-anger onto the Palestinian figure.
Yep. Yep.
Since the Palestinians are the traitors, the Palestinians are, they're the ones that are the problem, they're blah, blah, blah. And I'm not saying we're angels. Of course, we have a lot of problems, but we become these kind of like
Sure.
hated.
Becomes the receptacle of everything. Yeah.
But, also the Palestinian idea is on some level either being, at least in historical Palestine, killed or is dying in a way that, there might be not a lot of Palestinians left to blame. And I'm just saying that out of the conditions through which, what it means to really normalize is that it's a pact with the devil. It's a Faustian pact, and it will cost us.
Yes.
Probably psychologically, etc.
Yeah. Well, wajibna is to keep it alive, to keep not only the idea of Palestine alive, but Palestinians alive, in all of Palestine, and through Lebanon and through Syria and through Urdun. Like, that's the whole point, is to make sure that we don't see that, and that is a space that isn't stolen further, right? We think about theft materially, but you're also, this is sort of what I talk about in the book, is also theft, psychic theft, that these things then become materially possible. Abboud, I can't thank you enough for joining me, for your meticulous analysis. Folks, you probably all know him, know his work. Make sure you go back and rewatch all the episodes that he's done on Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. I think you're up, are you up to like 50 episodes or something? But I know that Jay has a whole playlist of Abboud's incredible analysis, as always. I know I turn to you. I said this before, both in terms of your precision. I trust you, and I trust your analysis, and I trust your ethical engagement with some very difficult subjects, and being able to retain the ability to sort of keep things in focus for us all. Folks are excited about your books. Do you want to tell them they're 2027? Somebody asked if they're available for pre-order. I don't know the answer to that, so I'm going to ask you.
No,
okay.
They're not.
Okay.
But they're coming soon. So yeah, I mean, both the spring of 2027.
Okay. We will make sure to let everybody know when they're on pre-order. And we'll have Abboud back before then for sure, but definitely then as well. I know I can't wait to get my hands on it. Ya'tik alf afiye. Inshallah, we'll get to see each other soon in real life. Eh? Inshallah. Thanks, everybody. Make sure you like. East is a podcast, folks. Thank you for joining us. And make sure that you also subscribe to both the channels, and see y'all soon.